Okay. Uh, my name is Tin Nguyen, and I am the Immigration Justice Coordinator at Viet where we advance social justice, and build power with our Vietnamese immigrants community through we. Sorry, a little nervous. All right, here we go again. My name is Tin Nguyen, and I'm the. My name is Tin Nguyen, and I'm the. Well, My name is Tin Nguyen, and I am the Immigration Justice Coordinator at Viet where we advance social justice and build power with our Vietnamese immigrants community. I am here with the director and producer uh, of a film called Refugee After War, and for a Q&A. And with this, I'll pass it on to the director to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching our little documentary series. Tin, thank you for moderating today. I'm Thanh Tan. I am the director of this series. I'm based here in Seattle, and am a journalist. Have worked across all different platforms for many years, but documentary film is a passion. And this was a project that was very near and dear to my heart and took quite a while for us to pull together, but I'm really happy to be here today to share more about the process. Sarah, I'll pass it to you.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Sarah Menzies, and I was lucky enough to be the executive producer on this docuseries. I'm the director of original productions at Cascade Public Media, which was the producing partner on this film or docuseries. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to work alongside Tan on this one, and I'm excited to talk with you about this, Tin. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. I guess before I ask you the question, I just want to acknowledge that it is a pleasure to be able to share the same stage, the same space with you all today in this on this talk about the subject, talk about this amazing film. So I guess let me begin by asking you the first question. The first question for me is: beside the similarity of the Afghans and the Vietnamese refugee, what motivated you to take on this project?
I think that as like a storyteller, as a journalist, when you see a story with interesting characters, when you see that there are stakes and the stakes are so high, and there are real people who are impacted, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be, I think that any storyteller would feel attracted to wanting to tell that story in some fashion. And I actually think that there are so few. When you think about Vietnamese and Afghans, we're actually very different. Our cultures are different. Our languages that we speak are different. Religion, all of that. We're actually not very similar, but it was shocking to see that it was shocking to see the fall of Kabul and to realize to what extent it is similar to the Vietnamese experience because of these really large factors and that are really out of our control. And what I mean is that you have the United States, both of our countries and our people experiencing having the United States intervene and recruit the help of our people in a cause that the U.S. cares about. You have long-term engagement, many, many years of U.S. involvement and a presence and resources being shared with the people of Afghanistan and with South Vietnam. And then you have a very sudden and very abrupt departure of the United States. And you see a refugee crisis, and you see people who had made this decision over many years to ally with the United States to help with the U.S. cause, which was their cause as well. But you see that what it feels like or what it looks like to be abandoned, more or less. And so that, like those similarities, I felt that I think we all felt triggered by it. For those of us who are familiar with the end of the Vietnam War and those of us who were seeing what was happening in Afghanistan, were familiar with it, but we still needed to understand the context and why it is that people were so impacted by the news coverage and the imagery. And so for me, as I think as a child of refugees who has really spent the bulk of my adult life now trying to understand this lived experience, because I grew up in a Vietnamese community and we didn't talk about it. And so as an adult, I've been trying to make sense of our own experience. And so in telling this story, it was a chance to look back as well as to look forward and to reflect on everything that we have learned, but also the many, many things that we have not learned from history. We're like terrible history students in America. So that was a huge motivating factor for me, was to remind everyone of what makes us very similar and also the things that differentiate us as well.
I'll answer that too. I think just because of where I was sitting in this project. I had actually just joined Cascade Public Media around when the Fall of Kabul had happened. So in my position as the director of original productions, overseeing all of the original content that we're putting out, I wanted to do something. I've spent quite a bit of time in Afghanistan as a documentary filmmaker as well, working on a feature-length documentary. And so being here in Seattle, knowing that a lot of Afghans were coming here, I felt like I was in a position where we could be doing something, at least from a storytelling standpoint. That's what I'm good at. that's what I could offer, and at least at that time, was being able to do something, shine a light on this in some way by making an impact-driven piece in this position at Cascade Public Media. And so I had been kind of starting to ask around the film community here in Seattle is small, especially the documentary one. And Tan and I had overlapped very briefly on one or two things before this, but I had heard whispers that she was starting something. And so I went to her very quickly as I started pitching this idea around of doing something that was Afghan related. And then realizing, gosh, Tan is telling this from the point of view of a Vietnamese person, someone embedded in this community, and not only that, but a daughter of refugees herself. What a wild tie-in if we could actually draw a parallel between these two different communities with similar histories, similar and very different, but at least similar histories with what brought them here. And it wasn't until, when we actually started talking and I realized exactly how embedded Tan was, not just with the Vietnamese refugee community, but with the Afghans that were coming here. I mean, she was really the perfect person to be telling this story and to be helming up this project. So it was I don't like using this word too much, but there was a lot of synergy, I think, in what I was starting to cultivate over at where I was sitting. And then again, hearing Tan was working on this, it was I think an incredible collaboration of being able to come together with those different concepts and create this.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. I think my next question is like having experience firsthand. I'll observe my father, coming over to coming after refugee after the war. Watching I'm a little bit concerned about for Mr. Mohammed. So how is he currently doing?
I think that's a great question, and Muhammad, first of all, is he's very representative of many, many Afghans. And he, just a little bit of background, it wasn't that he instantly agreed to be filmed and to be part of this project. A little bit of context too, going back, like before, one of the things that motivated me to make this doc series was because I was directly involved in helping Afghans, and because my friends and I had co-founded a emergency mutual aid project that we called Viets for Afghans, and we just wanted to do whatever we could to help. And so it started with raising awareness. It started with referring people to, letting people know how they could help refugees. We knew Afghan refugees were coming, and then that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. My dog is really ridiculous. Hey, Clara. Okay, go eat. Okay. So the project itself, I was actually doing direct service and I was volunteering, raising funds, and ultimately Viets for Afghans actually sponsored, based on our own experience of many of our families having been sponsored by someone. When they came to the US, we actually ended up doing the same thing and sponsoring 59 refugees, 9 families. And so actually, Mr. Mohammed was one of the individuals who was sponsored by us. And so we assisted his family, but that was not a factor at all in like why we wanted to cover him. He is a former officer in the Afghan military, and he has a very quiet and regal presence. And it just felt like he had something to say. And I actually worked with him for many months to even get him to agree to be interviewed. And once we actually got him to agree to be interviewed, the initial plan was to hide his identity and to not show him and to just have his face silhouetted on camera. But I think because we were able to gain his trust and he started to realize that, hey, there would be more power in what I'm saying if people can see me. And so he then agreed to be re-interviewed, and we were able to put him on camera and really able to establish trust and make sure that he understood that when I ask you questions, you are not obligated to have to answer. Like, you have agency, and he could decide what he was comfortable telling us. Because for him, the stakes are so high because the vast majority of his network is still in Afghanistan, is still in danger. And so I think that's just important context to understand about Mohammed. And he is, I don't feel comfortable speaking for him because, there's a lot going on in his life. So I will share that anecdotally. I've been fortunate enough to stay in touch with a lot of Afghans, including Mohammed, including many other people. And I think it is important for people to know that this is not the end of the story. This is not a happily ever after ending. For many of the people in our series, not just Mohammed, they are 2 years into their arrival in the United States, and they're not all doing well. They're all in different stages. Some of them are making some progress and are able to work on getting a special immigrant visa so that they actually are able to establish permanent residency here in the United States. There are many. Most others are still in complete limbo, where they are considered parolees. They're waiting. They don't know if they're going to have to go back to Afghanistan or if they can stay here. They're waiting for renewals so that they can get jobs. But there's a lot of people struggling with the cultural differences. There are people struggling with learning English, with finding a job that matches with their skill level and matches with whatever it is that they were doing when they were back in Afghanistan. You have a lot of former veterans who are still nursing injuries. You have mental health crisis, quite frankly, because displacement, as you know, Tin, as a refugee yourself, is not easy. And a lot of people they are being asked and expected to adjust to life very quickly and to move on. But it's really hard when, our refugee system was so messed up and was so fundamentally broken even before the Afghan refugee crisis started. And so the system has not been able to rebuild within the last 2 years fast enough to really meet these refugees where they're at and to provide them with wholesale, the services that they truly need in order to be thriving and in order to be moving on en masse. So you have individual cases of people who are doing great, a lot of babies being born, children getting adjusted, these little kids who are in elementary school and have become almost the de facto head of household because they've learned the language so quickly. So you're seeing those kind of things that are very similar to our Vietnamese community. So I think it's really important. I don't want to answer for Mr. Mohammed, but I want people to know that there are many, many people still struggling to get adjusted. This has not been an easy path for them. And not because they're not strong enough or because they don't want to succeed, but it's because the circumstances that are out of their control and that they find themselves in. Sarah, do you want to add on? Because I know you work with Afghans as well.
Yeah, I think true across the board, right? We did a lot to evacuate everyone that we worked with on the film or had any sort of connection to, anyone we could get out. And whether it's here in the States or abroad, I mean, most of the folks we were able to evacuate are actually in different parts of Europe. Some are just starting to make their way here, some in Canada, and across the board, this is really difficult. And I think you put it really well, Tan, to say that this is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. I mean, this isn't some golden ticket, you know, I mean, it is in some ways they got out, but they left a lot of people behind too. And they're reconciling that. They're in communities that aren't necessarily accepting of them, right? Or ready or eager to give work, any of the things you need to actually like live a life here. So no, I think you captured it well. And unfortunately it's universal, I think, all over the world right now, of how to truly give these folks a life in a new foreign country.
Wow. I'm sorry, that just remind me a lot of my own father, and growing up and experiencing his own difficulty of adjusting to like you said, a new foreign country. The next question I would like to ask is was there anything that you were able to take away from your own or other Vietnamese experience that you were able to apply to the Afghan program?
Well, I think that let me just like clarify, the perspective that I can provide is as a volunteer who was helping with mutual aid here in Seattle. So I was not at all involved in what the federal government was doing. I cannot speak for I can't speak for the refugee agencies that are here in Washington State. I can't speak for the Department of State or Homeland Security. So let me just start by saying that. But I will say that, like, on a very local micro level, as a human being and as a person, of course, my friends and I, when we saw what happened on August 15th, that Kabul was falling, I think many of us felt like very much like, wow, this must have been what it felt like for our parents and for our family members when on April 30th, 1975, when the fall of Saigon happened and when the Northern forces started coming into the city. And so I think that there was that compassion and that sense of empathy that was like instantly ignited when the fall of Kabul happened. And then I think that for us, for our little, this little ragtag like mutual aid thing, Viets for Afghans, it was, well, like many of our families were sponsored. They were sponsored by churches. They were sponsored by individuals, American citizens. They were sponsored by public officials. Like, there was a massive response to the initial wave of Vietnamese refugees who were evacuated in 1975. And it was really a loose network, and it was communities that welcomed the refugees. And I'm here in Washington State, and I grew up with stories from my dad telling me how no one wanted that initial wave of Vietnamese refugees. They were taken to Camp Pendleton and then to other military camps across the country with really no place else to go. And they were there for months. And so that gave us a sense of like, where are these Afghans going? We know that there are like nearly 130,000 of them who were evacuated in August of 2021. Where were they going? And they too were taken to military bases all around the world, including here in the United States. And so that gave our group at least a little bit of knowledge and like that shared experience. And it forced us to think about like, what did we need? And so our very first thing that we did was that Viets for Afghans did at the time was we decided, let's try to recruit people to open up their homes and provide emergency housing, because that's what the community was telling. That's what the refugee agencies, and that's what the Afghan community that was getting ready to receive, all of the influx of new of evacuees, they were saying, we need help with finding housing. And so we very quickly mobilized, and we kind of came up with this gimmick. We were like, 1975 is when the Vietnamese came. So let's try to find 75 sponsors for 75 Afghan refugees. Very quickly met that goal. And then, it just kind of we didn't even have time to think about or strategize, what we were going to do. It was just keep listening to what the community is saying they need. So they needed, resources, they needed clothing, they needed donations. So we would mobilize and we would try to get the local Vietnamese community to step up and help. And so many people did, because they remembered their own story. And as we kind of like progressed, as the months went by, I really got very, I had to look into the history books and see wow, there was an orderly departure program that the Vietnamese benefited from, but it took 11 years from between 1975 and the late 1980s. It took almost 11 years in order for the US and Vietnam to establish any kind of an orderly departure program, which basically is a way to legally and safely get people, who needed to leave the country because they felt and could prove that they were being persecuted by the communists. It took 11 years for a program like that. And in that time, if you think about it, between 1975 and 1986, you had the boat people crisis. You had people fleeing Vietnam and Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos. Like, you had people escaping to Thailand and to all of these islands around the South China Sea. And that was a massive humanitarian crisis. 500,000 people, an estimated 500,000 people died or went missing and were never seen again. And so to me, I'm like, we have to learn from the Southeast Asian experience and what people went through. That didn't stop them. Dying in the high seas did not stop people from taking desperate measures, to try to my parents used to always tell me it was finding freedom. Like, we would have done anything to find freedom. And it's so sad to me that had to happen. So if we're in a position today, especially with the internet, especially with the speed at which we're all communicating, if there's a way for us to remind people that that's a lesson that has to be learned from that conflict, is find a legal, safe pathway. Otherwise, people are going to do extreme things. And guess what? We're seeing that happen. We're seeing boat people. We are seeing people from all over the world, not just Afghanistan. We're seeing them flee by boat. We're fleeing them somehow get to South America and then trying to come up through the Mexican border to get across the US border. It's like, it's happening again. And we're kind of just sitting here and watching it. So to me, it's just very obvious that, like, we've been here before. So what is it going to take? Do we have to remind each other? And so hopefully Refuge After War is a little bit of a reminder to people, and to nudge people that, it's like, hey, like, the people that we're seeing today's refugees, like, that was us not very long ago, so I hope those are there are so many more lessons that can be learned, but I'll just start there. Sarah, do you want to add?
This one seems like very much a question for you, but I will say, not being Vietnamese and really starting this with my experience being more on the Afghan side of the time spent there, I learned so much from Tan, and I think that's what makes this series so special, is that and more than special, that's what makes this have an impact. I think it is the fact that that Tan really is, from telling it from such a personal place, which I know we went back and forth on a lot, and it was a lot for Tan to pour that out. And I appreciate you opening yourself up to that, Tan, because I think it also, it gives the audience someone to latch on to as well by understanding your story. But no, I think that really seeing these parallel histories unfold is scary, really, and you said it to begin with, Tan, before we just right at the top of this, that we are not good historians in this country. So yes, what I knew about the Vietnamese, the Vietnam War, and then the refugees coming here was very surface level. So no, what are we now? Probably 6 or 7 months out from premiering that series after over a year of working on it together. I'm still seeing stuff in the news, right? Almost daily. And it's almost, there's this part of me that's saying, God, Tan was a fortune teller. She knew exactly what was going to happen, but that's history. And it is just really troubling that we had all the signs, we had all of the opportunities to course correct this and do things differently. And the country didn't, the world didn't. And, but specifically our country. So it is really heartbreaking to see us do the exact same thing that we did just a few decades ago.
I'll add on to this as well, is that I still think, one of the things in the research for this and being involved in this issue is seeing how did the Vietnamese, it took 11 years, but how did we get to an orderly departure program? How did we get to that point? And we got to that point because we had individual Vietnamese people who were personally impacted. So, you had there is a Vietnamese woman, her name is Kuk Min Tha and her husband and her children were left behind. She came here alone because she happened to work for the embassy and somehow got out. And she spent 11 years developing and building personal relationships, keeping the community, like pre-internet, keeping the Vietnamese community abreast of what was going on, organizing. I mean, they had crazy, I don't know if it was a phone bank or what, but they had newsletters going. They were raising money. They were doing everything they could to keep awareness of those who were left behind and were either imprisoned or, you know, in refugee camps. They humanized who is a Vietnamese refugee or who is a Southeast Asian refugee. And that act of naming, like this, putting a face and a name on an issue that most people just didn't really care about. And especially post-Vietnam War, that was a very painful time for America because they lost that war.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's like keeping this at the forefront of people's minds. It was individuals who were incredibly, had their stakes were so high. They had loved ones who had something truly to lose if they didn't take action here in the United States. They learned how to build coalitions. They learned how to build relationships with members of Congress. You had a bipartisan panel. You had the John McCains, the John Kerrys, the people in Congress who were willing to come together to try to come up with a resolution here. And I think we're seeing the Afghans beginning to do that as well, which is really exciting to see. And this is in a lot of ways, it's going to be their battle. And for us as the Vietnamese, the lesson is we got to ally with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had allies. We had the Cubans. We had people who had survived the Holocaust. We had people who mentored and helped those first Vietnamese refugees to advocate for the following waves that came after that. And so we've got to learn from that. And I think help the Afghans to also see you're not alone. You're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a playbook here. We just got to actually talk to each other and try to find ways to tell these stories and contextualize them, you know, for people to see so that it actually gets through and they understand and see that you as an individual can do something and have an impact at a much higher level.
Hmm. Yeah, to me, I think what I hear is like it seems like history just repeats itself. You know, it's like we don't learn from history. So sorry, that's just my. Yeah. But let me move on to the next question. With the next question, I think you might have already answered this, but I'm gonna read off anyway, just in case. What lesson do you think the Vietnamese American community have learned that we can pass on to the Afghan refugee and vice versa?
I actually think that I did answer this in a way, but I think there's so much more that we still need to learn and we still need to process. And I think that was one of the surprising factors, because I will tell you that I think at the beginning of this journey, for me, I can speak for myself and to those around me. It was like, well, we've been there, done that. So of course we can like step up, and we're in a privileged position to be able to help others. But I think along the way, in many unexpected and sometimes very painful ways, it was seeing that like we haven't even processed this for ourselves. Like we haven't even made sense of our own pain and our own sense of loss. We haven't named that trauma. We haven't acknowledged the trauma. We haven't treated the trauma. It's been passed down, you know, through the generations. I was born well after the war. I was born after my parents escaped to the United States. So I think I went through a lifetime of thinking this is not my story and it's not my struggle. But it actually is, because I was raised in a community of people who, of course, they were impacted by displacement. And I think this narrative that like, oh, we're survivors and we're good now. We're in a good place. It's like, yes, that's true. And also we have like a lot of things that are still hurting us that we haven't fixed or we haven't healed yet. So to me, that was a huge eye-opening. That was very eye-opening for me to see that in this process. And to also, for me, I feel really strongly nowadays that the helpers also need help. And sometimes it's really easy for savior complex to creep in and for us to almost project our own pain, you know, like onto other people sometimes. Because there's a lot of that going on. I mean, it's just the US government was not prepared for the Afghan refugee crisis. And you had regular average citizens like myself who were not trained social workers, who are not trained humanitarians. We're just volunteers who wanted to do something. But we're dealing with people who are going through a lot, and we were not trained, as citizens to really deal with that. And so I think that, we as Vietnamese, it's like, I think the thinking that like, okay, we've already survived all that and we're fine and now we're ready to help others. Yes, that's true, but it's also it's a lot more complex. So I would just say that there's that, but I think there's also a good side to this though, because in telling our story, in Viets for Afghans, at least in my experience with that, I feel like we were able to do something. We were able to help. We were able to garner a lot of attention and interest in helping Afghan refugees, which is great. At one point, the U.S. State Department, when they were looking to expand their sponsorship program, they did reach out to Viets for Afghans and they did ask, can we come to Seattle? Can we see how you did it? Can you tell us? And we were able to share with them, here are our best practices. Here's what worked. Here's what did not work. And we really wanted to share that knowledge with others because we want refugees to succeed. We want the helpers who want to help refugees to succeed. And so that just means having a really honest dialogue and conversation. So that to me is a very clear example of how we as Vietnamese Americans could help the U.S. State Department, which has such a huge role to play in determining how many refugees can come, and then once they come, how are they treated, and how do we help them to succeed, and to have the best chance for success. Like that's where I think that we as Vietnamese Americans really have a voice and something to contribute.
Yeah, this mental health piece I think is very key that I want to double down on as well, just because, at least from the again, I can really just speak to my experience on the Afghan side, but, counseling and therapy isn't a part of that culture to begin with. Right. But they went through, weeks and months of this slowly happening to then suddenly happening to the measures they had to take to get out of the country, which is, I mean, as you both know all too well, are measures that no human should ever have to go through or consider, right? Or decisions that they needed to make are just not something you ever want to put on anybody to have to make. And then all of a sudden they're in a different place where they don't speak the language, they don't have any money, they don't have any support. I mean, it's trauma after trauma after trauma. And now that 2 years in, maybe they have started to learn the language. Maybe they are making a little money, but it's still a day-to-day process, right? And maybe they're able to send some money back home. I don't actually know if that's even an option right now, just given the situation in Kabul and everything, well, in all of Afghanistan. But the point being that this is a common thread, right, for a lot of refugee families, is that they're here making money and sending as much home as they can. At what point do they pause that cycle and say, I actually need to take care of myself. I need to like work through what I just went through. I mean, that is going to continue to take a back burner to the day-to-day pressures of just making it by in this society and hopefully supporting the ones that aren't here, that you've left behind if you're able to. And I think that's a piece in this that is, I would imagine, is very difficult to get through, how important that is as well, to actually prioritize yourself in that too and work through this stuff.
I think you're so right on that, Sarah, because I will say, like, I still keep in touch with a number of Afghan refugees, and they are so stressed about like taking care of their families back home. And I can't tell you I'm so happy to be able to try to provide whatever moral support I can. And what I have told, my Afghan friends is, again, I watched my family go through this. I watched people coming year after year. I have cousins who were unaccompanied minors who were sent to escape in boats by themselves and were in refugee camps as young teenagers, and came to this country. It took a while, and I watched them have to rebuild their lives. And there were moments when my family, we really were like, is my cousin going to make it? Like, you know, he works on Microsoft now. I mean, it's just, you know, it's like and I think it really helps for the refugees today to see and to hear those stories. But the number one thing I try to tell my friends is you have to take care of yourself, because you are in limbo. Your own status is not safe right now. So the best thing you can do is make sure that you are taking care of yourself, that you're healthy, that you're fed, that you have a roof over your head, and you know that you are, whatever money it is that you're making, you've got to try to save that, because you're going to have to be the person who vouches for and sponsors your family members when that day comes. If it ever comes, you know, you're going to have to be stable yourself. But it's so hard because they are dealing. And Tin, you probably know this because my family dealt with it. It's like when you have a family in Vietnam who they don't understand and they don't see and they're struggling, and they are telling their families here, what are you doing? Why can't you get me out yet? Where is the money? I need you to send me money. And they just don't understand. And, you know, and having to deal with that, watching some of my Afghan friends deal with that frustration because they feel that responsibility, you know, to the people that they left behind. It's so similar. I think any immigrant or refugee family or anybody who has left home and come here to the U.S. can identify with that.
Yeah, just exactly how you describe it. It's really eerie that the similarity of it. You know, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just listening to your, you know, the mental health. You know, I mean, the trying to get over the trauma. Watching my father, my mom, you know, fighting over money. You know, coming over here, taking care of 8 kids. You know what I mean? And, you know, not speaking the language, trying to make it, put food on the table, and then have to go to Little Saigon almost every weekend to send stuff, you know, at least, you know, how I see when I was younger, it seemed like almost frequently, like almost every weekend, they come down here, try to send money back to Vietnam. I mean, send box of food and stuff like that back to Vietnam. And the argument, you know what I mean? And the resentment and the chaos they create in the family. I know for a fact it affected my life, you know, my upbringing, and the man I became and the man who I am today. Yet I'm still processing, and so I think that was the question that I was going to ask. It's like, you know, we went through it, you know, and we experience, we watch it. Our parents, we observe it. You know, what can we bring to the table to help the Afghans refugee to ease their, you know, you know, to ease their life over here. But yeah, I appreciate that. That's really powerful, very powerful and emotional for me. So the next question is, what do you hope for your audience to take away from this film?
Well, I think that, you know, first of all, I think that we just, first of all, we have to recognize that history can teach us a lot. Just let's acknowledge that. And I think that, you know, right now there is it's like, look at what is happening in the current situation with Afghan refugees. And, you know, right now, one of the very basic issues in Congress is they cannot pass the Afghan Adjustment Act, which is, this is a bill that has bipartisan support. It would provide a permanent status for those who are already here. There's nothing controversial about it, and yet we can't pass it because our Congress is so divided right now. And to me, it's sort of like, I hope that, you know, I hope that by humanizing what the crisis is and what it looks like, that I hope it can help to move the needle. And again, compassion and empathy are really, really important. And how do you develop that? And I happen to believe that, you know, film, visual medium is a really important and valuable way to try to sway hearts and minds. And so I hope that people will watch this and will feel inclined to want to help. And then we'll do very easily search or Google how to help Afghans. You know, if perhaps for some people, it could be you want to go to your local refugee agency and you want to sign up to volunteer to mentor refugees, you know, who are coming, Afghans who are in your community. For others, maybe it's advocating and making sure that your congressperson is supportive of the Afghan Adjustment Act. You know, I mean, there's there's so many different ways to get involved, but one person can make a difference. But so find your tribe, look at what's going on in your local community, and get involved in some way. You know, and I also say there's nothing wrong with people who want to do one-off support. Like there are organizations that need financial support and financial help. So if you want to donate funds, there's a way to do that. If you want to help like mentor somebody, there's a way to do that. So just get involved and, you know, start do your homework, do your Google search or whatever. So I hope people take that away, and that you have the power to do something from wherever you are.
I mean, we've been in this war for 20 years, right? And I think that Afghanistan just was sort of synonymous with conflict zone. Or, you know, and a big reason why I had spent 5 years making the film I'd made a few years ago was to show there's a whole rich culture there. You know, this isn't, let's get beyond just conflict zone that we don't have any sort of identity or people attached to other than maybe the Taliban, right? And like forgetting the entire country that is actually trying to live their lives and push that out. And so I think that for me, at least, the start of this project really was about continuing to humanize that, right? And make sure that people got rid of these stereotypes, right? That has just been placed in this region for 20 years, you know, being at war there. And so, and really celebrate the vibrancy and like this, you know, this rich culture that's there. So I think that has been for the last 10 years forefront for me with my work there. And so it felt like I owe it to them to also show up when things go the way they did, right? When during the fall of Kabul. So where am I going with this? I think while we aren't in Kabul seeing this, we aren't in Afghanistan seeing the culture, we can still see, well, what's going on with Mohammed now? What does it actually mean to land somewhere new? And I think that what Tan and the team did to show that and follow him for a few months did show those hurdles, while also seeing him sharing a meal. You know, those are my memories in Afghanistan, or sitting on the ground with like too many plates of food to even count, all completely different from each other. I just love that visual because that was here in Seattle between Afghans and Vietnamese folks. It felt like I was put in a room, you know, in the countryside in Afghanistan. I mean, just those moments to me are such rich texture to show people that have no idea what this culture means outside of what you see in the news is just so important to me, just as then understanding the Vietnamese side. And that's where I felt new to this and learned a lot both through Tan as well as the incredible subjects that she brought in to speak in this docuseries. So I guess all of that to say, I think people need to detach conflict zone, war, you know, all of these things from I don't want that to be synonymous with Vietnam, with Afghanistan, you know, with Syria, with Iraq, all of these places. And now they need us, right? I mean, like we've got people literally here in our community that might as well be on Mars, right? Like trying to figure out how to navigate this new place. I just don't want people to think, well, they got out, they escaped. That's a win, right? And not understanding it's a whole lot more than that. So I hope that as folks watch this, I guess this is a very common way to say that I hope that we are able to show them another side of these cultures. I hope that they see this as a much larger battle than like getting their name on a manifest and on a plane that got them out of that airport. You know, that was just the start of their struggles. So yeah, making sure folks don't forget about these people that have joined our communities now, and that is, yes, there's elements to celebrate, but there's a lot more that needs to happen now. And I want to make sure that this series can continue to get out there and folks are reminded that the work is just starting. And then all the history stuff, we've already talked about that, but really learning from history is a big piece of what we're doing here.
But I also really, like, before we wrap too, I want to give Sarah Menzies, who is the executive producer, this series would not have happened and it would not have been produced without me as a freelance independent director with another full-time job. I would not have been able to do this without Sarah Menzies finding the resources, having the support of our PBS station here in Seattle, so that I had a professional, like a director of photography, I had a producer, I had a team that was helping me to not only do this, but I will also say centering this on voices from people of color, refugee, immigrant communities. We had, I think, one person who was not a person of color in this entire series. It was all Afghan and all Vietnamese voices, which is a far cry from our Vietnamese community and the representation of the Vietnamese people and the Vietnam War in the many, many years after the Vietnam War. So we are 2 years removed, and we have a series which is a great example, I hope. And thanks to the Viet Film Fest for showcasing this, because we really need to center on the communities that we're telling these stories about, truly. And so, Sarah, thank you. And Viet Film Fest, thank you. Tin, thank you. I will toss it back to you because I know you got to wrap.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. You know, I mean, like I said, it triggered a lot of emotion when I was watching it. You know, I mean, it's just powerful how you have. It's just an honor to be sharing the same space. You know, I mean, with incredible, creative artists. You know, I mean, using this medium to highlight, the trauma and the experience of refugee community, and me, I can't thank you so much to put it out there for the society to see, and not only for the Vietnamese community, for what we have went through, but the Afghan refugee community that they're currently going through right now. You know what I mean? And I just want to thank you all for that. But with the conclusion is that, this concludes our Q&A for the Refuge After the War. I want to thank Thanh Tan, right? That's pronounced. I'm sorry. And Sarah, I apologize. Can you help me?
Yeah, Sarah Menzies.
Yeah, Sarah Menzies for joining me today. Viet Film Fest continue virtually through Sunday, October 15, and we hope to see you all very soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you, y'all. Bye.